Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It felt almost deliberate, as if the cosmos itself was responding to what was happening in the tiny darkened reading room at the Newman Ranch. Thunder rolled so deep it seemed to reverberate through the flooring. Wind howled like a wounded beast, and rain hammered relentlessly against the windows. Sharon silently stood close to the glass, her arms encircling her as though she were attempting to secure the fragments of her heart. She hadn't slept. Nick hadn't either. They had been left feeling raw, hollow, scared, and in a state of limbo that no parent should ever have to go through in the 72 hours after Noah vanished. They were still unsure if Noah was dead. Whether he was hiding or not was unknown to them. They had no idea if he was being pursued or just running. However, Noah's attorney had called and asked Sharon and Nick to come in right away in a tone too soft to be consoling. And they were broken by that. Since a lawyer didn't ask for a little thing. A lawyer didn't call until a severe matter had already been initiated. A lawyer would not call until someone was ready for the situation. And Sharon's legs almost buckled as the attorney produced a sealed letter bearing Noah's handwriting. Nick swallowed hard and reached for her hand, both of them shaking and hoping that the envelope didn't contain a farewell. The reality, however, was worse. Much worse. Noah's handwriting, sloppy but recognizable, appeared on the front of the thick, wax-sealed envelope. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it back." Sharon snapped. Not a cry or a sob, but a sound that belonged to the most basic kind of grief, ripped from her breast. Nick feared he would pass out next to her because his heart was clenching so tightly. But even as his own eyes welled up with tears, he made himself remain calm, to be the anchor. As he unsealed the seal, his fingers trembled as he unfolded page after page of writing that he immediately recognized. Noah's lengthy loops, hasty edits, and smudged ink where emotion must have interfered. Nick started reading aloud as Sharon leaned in and tightened her hold on his arm. Every syllable was filled with Noah's voice. "I understand this will cause you pain. This will feel like betrayal, I realize that. But I want you to know why I didn't tell you about this. Why I failed to return home at the appropriate time. Why I was unable to tell you the truth while looking you both in the eyes." With tears streaming down her face, Sharon put a palm to her mouth. As he went on, Nick's voice cracked. "I loved someone, yet I was unable to keep them safe. Someone whose passing is my biggest failing." Nick continued reading even as Sharon closed her eyes and muttered, "Elena." Elena was her name. She was also meant to be my wife. Sharon broke down in tears. Nick blinked quickly, finding it difficult to talk. In order to prevent anyone from ruining it before it started, we were keeping it a secret. However, someone discovered it. Someone close to the family. Someone who believed that in order to love her, all else had to be lost. Sharon's breath was trembling. She vanished. Additionally, I never forgiven myself. The letter changed now, with darker ink where he had applied more pressure whilst writing. I searched for her. I kept searching. Additionally, when the messages began, I became aware that she was still alive. However, she was confined. She was under someone's control. She was being used by someone to manipulate me. Nick experienced a chill because this was more than simply grief. It was conspiracy. Sharon's voice broke. "This is about Audra, Nick." "It must be." Nick gave a cautious nod, but the thunder outside shattered the windows and broke through the sky before he could say anything more. He went on. "If I was unable to return to you, it was because doing so would have endangered you both. They observed me. They put me in danger. They also made threats against you. I couldn't allow that to occur." Unable to support herself any longer, Sharon fell into the closest chair. Because the letter wasn't finished and the weight of what was about to happen was much greater, Nick stopped, wiped his face with the back of his palm, and continued reading. "I'm not leaving behind cash, real estate, or artwork. I'm abandoning the truth. What I owned has nothing to do with my will. It has to do with my debt." Nick gulped forcefully, fear settling in his gut. "I must return Elena's life." Sharon's tears slowed, grief and uncertainty mingling. Nick squinted his eyes. "What is meant by that?" She uttered a barely heard murmur. Nick continued to read. "She is still alive. Or she was anyway. And if she is no more, someone extremely close to this family is responsible for her blood. With white knuckles, Sharon gripped the chair's arm. I am aware of her abduction. She was hidden by someone I know. I am aware of who deceived me. And I understand why. The air pressed inward, making the room seem to tilt. Nick's tone faltered. It was intended to keep the family safe. To save our heritage. In order to avoid another scandal. They thought that if I stayed I would break. They thought she would destroy us. Who? Noah? Said Sharon in a whisper. Who? Nick flipped the page. Victor was aware. The ensuing hush was deafening. Shock-freezing sadness in mid-motion caused Sharon's face to go blank. Nick closed his eyes because he already had a suspicion in the back of his mind, somewhere he never wanted to admit. The Empire is always protected by Victor Newman. Victor Newman, who always made the decisions about who was removed and who stayed. However, the letter was not completed. He wasn't acting by himself. In a whisper, Sharon said, Nick, don't do that. However, Nick persisted in reading because he had to confront the reality. There is another will, Mom. Dad. A concealed one. One that describes everything. Where Elena was brought. Who provided assistance. What they carried out. And my strategy for rescuing her. Sharon's breath left her as she gasped. Find that will if I don't return. And don't rely on the family to take care of this when you do. Don't visit Victor. Don't visit Victoria. If someone tells you to keep quiet, don't listen. Nick put his hand down by his side. He lost his grip on the letter. But there was still one page. Sharon carefully took it up, her fingers shaking wildly. Slowly, she scanned the last handwriting with her eyes. Mom, Dad, I didn't vanish. Nick's heart stopped beating. The words were mouthed by Sharon. I went to pick her up. The room was lit by lightning. The sky was divided by thunder. And at that very time, Sharon muttered. He's still alive. The door opened. There was the sound of footsteps. Victor then came in, calm and in control, as if he was already aware of what they had just discovered. The air itself trembled as Sharon stood slowly, her eyes flaming with anger, anguish, and a mother's rage. The emotional gravity that hung in every breath and clung to the walls made the air within the Newman Ranch feel heavier than before. As Sharon and Nick sat side by side at the long wooden table, the gentle illumination of the lamp cast shadows across their faces, giving them a more aged, weathered, and frail appearance than they had ever had. As if time itself had attempted to shield them from what they had just discovered, the will was spread open before them, its pages slightly crinkled at the edges. However, time was unkind. The truth is even more terrible. The presence of Noah's neat and steady handwriting was unmistakable proof that this was no accident, hasty choice, or impulsive action. He was aware. He had a plan. Long before anyone suspected that something was amiss, he had written this months before to the disaster. Sharon's shoulders shook from the inability to breathe, and she pressed her trembling fingers to her lips. Nick thought that he would shatter if he didn't grasp onto something, so he kept one hand on her back to ground her and steady himself via her. He knew, Sharon said in a rough, scratchy voice that was hardly audible. He was aware that something would occur. Why didn't he visit us, Nick? What kept him from telling us? She looked up at him, her eyes glassy and watery and broken with sorrow, looking for answers he didn't have. Nick's throat became constricted. He pressed the burning pain behind his eyes shut. He answered, I don't know, and his voice cracked just as his heart had. I'm not sure why he remained silent. Perhaps he didn't want us to be concerned. Perhaps he didn't believe it to be serious. Perhaps he stumbled. The guilt was too genuine and too deep. Perhaps he believed he could manage it by himself. Sharon wept, silently, painfully, powerlessly, because Noah was flawed in that way. His biggest injury. His biggest asset. He had always made an effort to keep those he cared about safe, even if it meant quietly bleeding himself. Noah wrote the will's horrible secret in his own words. They were unable to unhear or unread the words. Words that altered all of their preconceived notions. I need you to understand if something were to happen to me. They were pursuing me. Their identities are still unknown to me. However, I am aware that they are related to the events in Los Angeles. I discovered something I shouldn't have. I believe someone is observing me, and I need you to keep her safe if I go missing, get hurt, or anything else happens. Keep the child safe. My kid. When she read those sentences, Sharon had fallen to the table, her tears reverberating through Nick's bones, the house, and the very roots of the Newman name. A child was born to their son. A youngster who is hidden. A child nobody was aware of. A kid who might suddenly be in danger. Nick's thoughts were racing. His heart thumped. Like a flame, every fatherly instinct blazed within him. Noah had been threatened. He had been following. A person had been anticipating his slide, break, or fall. Noah was gone now. Noah should have been sitting in the chair next to Sharon, but it was empty. I'm laughing. He smirked a little as usual, teasing his dad about athletics, leaning in to give his mother embraces that she believed he had outgrown. Existing. Inhaling. Right here. Instead, they were holding on to ink and pages. Sharon slowly raised her head and brushed away the tears that would not go away. We must locate her, she said. We must locate the infant. We must keep them safe. Our grandchild Nick, who is Noah's child, is out there. By themselves. Nick locked his jaw and nodded. A storm, the same storm that rises in Victor when someone comes for family, was gathering in his eyes. The same maelstrom that, when pushed, made Newman men dangerous. However, Nick possessed Sharon's heart, something Victor did not. He was therefore unstoppable. He got to his feet and paced, his thoughts racing over every relationship Noah had ever had, every city he had visited, and every individual he had come into contact with. However, something wasn't quite right. There had been a void. There had been silence. Then the realization struck him like lightning ripping through the sky. Victoria. In Los Angeles, Noah had spent time with her son. They had collaborated. They were friends. They were secretive. When the accident occurred, Victoria had behaved oddly, sad, yes, but aloof, guarded, and cautious. Noah's hospital room was out of her reach. She had stayed away from Sharon. She had not been there, but she had given sympathies. Nick's posture changed, and Sharon noticed how his shoulders tightened and his eyes narrowed. Her breath was erratic as she said, "What is it?" Every muscle in Nick's body tensed as he took a slow breath. Victoria is aware of something. She was forced to. She would have heard from Noah. Or her son told her. This is not all there is to it. Sharon shut her eyes. She knew he was correct, not because she had any doubts about him. And secrets were not something Victoria Newman, took lightly. It was large if she had one. Nick reached for his coat. I'm heading to her. Sharon got to her feet as well, blotting away her tears with the fortitude that came from being a mother. No. She steadied her voice and shook her head. We go together. They had changed from being broken parents to being the shattered remnants of a family that had been split apart repeatedly over decades. They were powerful. A tempest. A unified front, built by love and fashioned by pain. The ranch door suddenly opened before they could get out. A figure with a hood drawn low over their face was followed by the chilly wind. Sharon took a step back, gasping. Nick moved forward, angry, protective, and prepared to rip someone to pieces. The person raised their head. She was the one. Red eyes from tears. Pale face. Trembling hands. She stuttered, her voice shaking with remorse, heartbreak, and dread. There was nowhere else for me to go. Sharon and Nick froze. They knew who she was. The mother was her. Noah's child's mother. She had visited them. However, something moved in the porch's shadows behind her. There was another observer. She had been followed by another person. The child was also desired by another person. Additionally, the will. There was no warning from the will. It was just the start of a conflict. Additionally, it had just arrived at their front door. Standing trembling in the doorway, the woman's breath was audible in the chilly night air. As though attempting to steady a heart that was already rupturing again, Sharon's hand gently rose to her chest. Nick approached with a quiet, controlled voice, but every nerve in his body felt like a wire that was about to break. Shut the door, he muttered. Her fingers trembled as she turned the latch swiftly. Sharon's legs began to give out when she eventually took off her hood. Eva was the one. Noah had once talked about Eva, the modest artist he had been close to in London, with a gentleness Sharon had never forgotten. A woman who abruptly left Noah's life as abruptly as she had arrived. It was widely believed that the romance merely waned. But now Sharon was wiser. This had never been an easy task. Tears were streaming down Eva's cheeks. Her voice cracked as she murmured, "I apologize. I ought to have informed you earlier. I ought to have." She clenched her arms tightly over her torso as her voice cracked utterly. "However, I was afraid. I was really afraid." Sharon approached her cautiously, mother to mother. Her voice was shaking but firm enough to be hopeful when she questioned, "Eva, where is the baby?" Eva took a deep breath. "Safe," she said in a whisper. "For the time being. However, I was unable to continue running. They located us. Although I believed I could conceal, they always managed to find us." "Who?" Nick's voice was low and furious as he stepped between them and ordered, "Who is pursuing you? Who followed Noah?" Eva's eyes, filled with fear, remorse, and unfathomable grief, were fixed on him. The same individuals that Noah was attempting to expose prior to before. She was unable to speak. She didn't have to. Nevertheless, Nick and Sharon sensed them. Before to his passing. Sharon clenched her eyes as a blade of pain twisted through her. Nick's knuckles were white and his fists were clenched. Eva went on. They wanted what he uncovered. A group, an organization, powerful individuals, investors, and businesspeople. In LA, Noah discovered evidence that they were using art purchases to launder money. He made an effort to stop them. He made an effort to protect the infant and me. We believed we were intelligent. We believed we were being cautious. However, there was always someone observing. Nick's voice fell to a menacing snarl. They now desire the child. Because they are aware that Noah would have bequeathed to them everything, including his investments, funds, and interests. Eva gave a slow nod. "Your family has adversaries. I'm just afraid." Sharon's voice broke. "No. We are yours." For the first time, Eva saw Sharon as someone who still had love to give rather than as someone to be feared or as Noah's mother, the mourning mother. Someone who would stand up for what was important. However, a sound was made before any of them could speak again. A gentle rubbing of the window pane. Nick's instincts were keen, his senses burning, and he turned abruptly. Without hesitation, he snatched the poker from the fireplace. Sharon's breath seized in her throat as she froze. With wide, scared eyes, Eva clenched her hands together. Outside, a shadow moved. There was a person present. Observing, listening, hunting. Nick took careful, stealthy steps toward the main door. In order to protect Eva, Sharon took hold of her hand and dragged her behind her. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the pounding of 3 hearts that were beating too quickly. Then nothing. Quiet. The gloom had vanished. The door was not opened by Nick. Not quite yet. He came back slowly, his jaw clenched. Finally, he stated, "We're not safe here. They won't give up once they find you. They believe they can scare us. They believe they can kidnap Noah's kid." Something bright and furious ignited inside Sharon, and she straightened. "No one is ever taking anything from this family again," she declared in a firm, unwavering voice. Eva nodded after giving her a serious look. Nick grabbed his phone. "I'm going to call Victor. Because if anyone knew how to deal with adversaries that lurked in the shadows, Victor Newman was the one." However, Sharon softly covered his hand with hers. "No," she said in a whisper. Nick gazed at her. "Sharon." "Not just yet," she stated. "This turns into a war before we know who the true enemy is if Victor gets involved now. And someone else will suffer if it turns into a war. Eva perhaps. The infant perhaps. Perhaps." Her voice trailed off. "Perhaps you." Nick paused. Since she was correct. Victor didn't engage in combat. He ruined them. Occasionally, the consequences were too severe. Eva took a step forward, her voice uncertain but confident. "There's something else in the will," she whispered softly. "I believe you haven't seen it yet." Nick and Sharon looked at each other. Eva took a second envelope out of her coat pocket slowly, very carefully. The handwriting of Noah. Nick was on the verge of passing out. Both of them received the message. Sharon's hand shot to her mouth as she gasped. Once more tears came, new different tears. There was no fear in writing this letter. It was written with affection. A lasting type of affection. Even after the individual has passed away. Nick pulled it open. And they started reading together side by side.